Ah, yes. It's the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. This is our last show in Paris, and then we go on to other countries. Oh, I'm so excited. You know, the Gilets jaunes, you've heard about it. We're going to talk about it. And we're going to talk about the French economy. Yep, they have one here. Stacy.
Yes, well, in fact, this is Black September. That is what the Gilets jaunes are promising. There are also many people out there who say, well, nobody covers the Gilets jaunes anymore and that this is a conspiracy. One thing you do notice is that the Gilets jaunes do not appear on the Champs-Élysées anymore because the police have successfully kept them from there. So Paris is a sprawling city and there are continuing to be protests, despite, it having been August and they don't come back from summer vacation until mid-September. But one thing I wanted to note is that there is a lot of attention that has been paid to the ongoing, the unrest in Hong Kong, the protesters there. And something remarkable happened that really stood out to me because it reminded me of what is happening here on the Gilets jaunes, this globalization of not only protest, but also globalization of police military tactics, police surveillance tactics, nation-state surveillance tactics. And here is an image from Hong Kong. This is before Carrie Lam backed down, but this is a poster. This is a nurse with an eye patch, and "Sir, you forgot your conscience." It says, "Hong Kong police attempted to murder Hong Kong people." So one young woman had her eye taken out by being hit by the equivalent of an LBD or a flashbang or flashball as they call them here in France, where 24 people have lost their eye.
Right. It's interesting, this trickle-down militarization and targeting of civilians that we see in global conflicts is now happening more on the local protest. So, we've normalized the idea that civilians are targeted in war now. That used to be against the Geneva Convention. It used to be against the rule of war. But now this has been normalized. And so now in everyday protests, you also see the militarization of protests and the targeting of civilians with the military-grade weapons.
Well, actually, what you see with Robert Chalmers' piece in GQ is they're not specifically randomly necessarily targeting ordinary civilians. They're targeting people who are journalists, medics, and like bloggers, people who get interviewed, participants in the Gilets jaunes who get targeted because they go on the news and they tell the story. So that's why I think it's quite interesting that the eye patch, the eye being taken out, 24 people here in France have lost their eyes. And these the weapons that they shoot are from Switzerland and they have laser precision. So the fact that 24 eyes get taken out, it seems almost intentional, but in this day and age where we talk about Big Brother, the eye in the sky, Orwellian, like totalitarian states surveying everything, and also at the same time, like in the past week, the U.S. Department of Defense is now going to save us from social media, viral stories that they say are not true and that they're going to suppress these, that suddenly they're taking over social media. They want to control what we see. So here they're targeting, according to Robert Chalmers, journalists who report the situation of what's going on here, what people are protesting, that people that are telling the story, that it's not just some random acts of violence, it's people who are talking about economic injustice. They're talking about important economic and financial matters, and they don't want it to spread, I think.
Well, yeah, it reminds me of the WikiLeaks video that was leaked of the U.S. military targeting the Reuters photographer and killing him. Cold blood. So that again, this has been normalized in this new age of terror. And this is what protesters and journalists face.
So here's the piece on GQ magazine, and it's from Robert Chalmers, and it goes, "The real victims of France's Yellow Vest Revolution, classified sublethal, the rubber bullets, tear gas, and stun grenades used by French police have nevertheless maimed, blinded, and killed almost as many in the last 6 months as in the 20 years before the Yellow Jacket protests began taking to the streets of La République. To investigate how and why our cousins across the water have stood firm in the face of authorized force that would shock and outrage anywhere else in Europe, GQ's Robert Chalmers joined Les Gilets Jaunes. Remember, the Gilets Jaunes movement started the 24th of October, 2018, and he goes and talks to Jerome Rodriguez, who is a 40-year-old plumber, and he became a kind of one of the symbols of the Gilets Jaunes. He was often on the news here, and then he believes he was targeted with this because he lost his eye. And I can't even show the photos because it's so gross. Most of us who have lost an eye were hit near the cheekbone or temple, says Jerome Rodriguez, at which point that section of your skull shatters. Your cranium is then reconstructed using screws and titanium plates. I was fortunate in that I had no skeletal injury. The officer responsible aimed directly at my eyeball, which burst. He pauses. Coffee?
Right. Well, it's like a new generation of ghouls. Remember?
Yes. In fact, they do mention that.
After World War I, the trench warfare produced these horrific
facial
injuries, and the term ghoul came at that time.
24 people have lost their eye. At least 5 people had the limbs blown off, and thousands have had other severe injuries like broken jaws and stuff like that. And a lot of it is caused by this flash bang or flash ball, LBD. The LBD, which is Lanceur de Balle de Défense, is a high-precision Swiss-manufactured weapon equipped with laser pointer sights. Though categorized as sublethal, its potential to maim and kill, especially if pointed, as it should never be, at the upper body, is such that it is used in almost no other European country. The GLI F4 stun grenades, which contain 24 grams of TNT and explode before delivering CS gas at a deafening 165 decibels, are also used only in France. President Emmanuel Macron and his Minister of the Interior, Christophe Castanet, have ignored repeated demands for the abandonment of the use of both weapons from organizations including the United Nations, the European Parliament, the Council of Europe, Amnesty International, Greenpeace, and Reporters Sans Frontières. At the time of writing, both weapons continued to be used by the CRS, which is the riot police. This French government's sole concession has been to say that they will stop using stun grenades when the stocks run out.
And they're tempting fate, particularly here in France, with the legacy of Maximilien Robespierre and the Reign of Terror and the Revolution. They can push the people so far, and then it's time for retribution.
Well, again, Max and I have lived here in France over the years. Max has lived here 15 years. We've seen many protests, thousands of protests, manifestations all the time. And it's always very organized, and the police, the riot police, the CRS, sit there in their van and they have their lunch, have their wine. But I've never seen in the videos that this sort of violence has never happened. So what's going on? You're going to talk to Paul Moreira, who's a journalist and has been attending these, for his take on that. But in terms of who is conducting the violence, here Robert Chalmers says he, is a press officer. He's wearing no gilet. He himself was not wearing a yellow vest because, by the way, even though by law you have to have it in your car, if you wear it in the streets of Paris, the police can fine you 135 euros. So he didn't. Robert Chalmers did not wear that, and he was mentioning that he would be chased by these riot police that were just chasing him down the road, like looking to do violence to him. And he says that the widely mistrusted CRS, which formed in late 1944, partly recruited from the ranks of the detested GMR, the force used by the Vichy regime to counter the French resistance, are complemented by a group of plainclothes enforcers called the Brigade Anti-Criminalité, the BAC, who you see mingling with the Gilets Jaunes. The BAC in their conduct and appearance resemble nothing so much as the less conciliatory type of Millwall supporter, so a hooligan.
The economies of these countries like France, the United States, and Britain relied heavily on ransacking foreign areas, foreign countries, foreign territories through what, the Confessions of an Economic Hitman, John Perkins, describes as ransacking of these countries and taking all their wealth. Well, they ran out of wealth in these foreign countries. Now they're raiding their local pension accounts. The French government is raiding the French people's pension accounts. Same thing in Britain, same thing in the US. And so this is devolving into guerrilla warfare, effectively. So all the rules of conflict are out the window, and it's everyone for everyone.
We always point out Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and this is something that the CIA uses when they look at countries that they can overthrow and when they attempt to destabilize a country. The most basic needs: food, water, shelter. those, if your government can't meet those, that's when you're targeted for unrest, and that's when unrest is possible. So, the quote from this guy who lost his eye, what the Gilets jaunes represent is universal. What we are asking for people to earn a salary that allows them to eat properly and put a roof over their kids' heads, basic provision for the unemployed, and an end to this obscene situation where people are left on hospital trolleys through a lack of medical care, the abolition of extortionate prices for privatized gas and electricity. We have a word for this vision. It's called humanity.
This inflection point has been met over and over again. Look, it's a social contract, and that's what is being violated by those who are doing the governing. There's the governed and the governing body, and there's a contract, and there is a quid pro quo. And typically what happens is the governing body gets arrogant and too rich, and they subjugate everyone else to poverty and disease, and there's a revolt. So we're at that point again.
And quickly, one final headline here. The French are finally doing better than the Germans. This is from Bloomberg News, and what they are saying is that for the first time, France is actually doing better than Germany in terms of GDP growth, and they credit Macron's capitulation to the Gilets jaunes and the introduction of the 25 billion euros in fiscal policy stimulus.
Right. Well, that's a lot of foie gras. Thank you, geese. Quack, quack. Don't go away. Much more coming your way. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to turn to Paul Moreira. He's been called the Che Guevara of independent journalists, out there on the front lines, taking the tear gas and danger wherever things are kicking off. Paul, welcome back. We had you on a few years ago.
Yeah, some time ago.
So it's great here in Paris. We catch up with old friends, particularly independent journalists who give us the straight dope on what's been going on out there. You've been covering the Gilets jaunes for most of the acts, as they are called, each Saturday. We are Act 43, heading toward Act 44. According to what you've seen, Paul, how has it evolved over the past 40 weeks?
I've covered mostly the beginning of it, and it was quite an interesting movement, because in the beginning, of course, they were rebelling against the price of the gasoline, so it was like the starting point, and then it built up on inequality. Basically, the main topic was inequality. And I remember in the beginning, it was something really incredible, because there was like a front line clashing with the police, not very violently actually, but it was spectacular somehow. And then like 20 meters in the back, you had like clusters of people talking, and they were talking mostly about tax inequality. And it was quite fascinating, because you had this mix of violence really nearby, and then people talking. And we know that this kind of like free talk is always the sign of genuine insurgency movements that are not canalized by a specific entity, even though there were many, many people very active trying to manipulate the movement, of course, from the far right to the far left. The far right was kicked out physically by the far left, or out of the movement, around January, I would say end of December, January. But all the time, because the movement was stemmed from people who had no structural involvement, like in trade unions, or little, weak structural involvement. There's always been this possibility that some of them, and I believe some of them, would go vote for the Rassemblement National, which is the national populist movement in France, and others would not vote, like vote white.
So having lived in Paris and in France for a number of years myself, there's always a manifestation somewhere, proteste somewhere. And how is this different than what you would see many, many times over the years? What makes this different, the Gilets jaunes?
The Gilets jaunes was not really a demonstration. The Gilets jaunes were a series of low-intensity insurgency moments. There were people...
Low-intensity insurgency moments.
Yeah, that's what I would call them. And
right, and you're characterizing this as really, it started off with folks talking about taxes and inequality. And you say that behind the barricades, there's a lot of chatter, and that indicates a lot of people talking informally. And you believe that indicates what exactly? That there's more, that is less specific, that is more generalized, is it a protest seeking a purpose? In other words, we need to protest. We're not exactly sure why we're protesting, but we need to get out there, and then we'll figure it out once we're out there.
Yeah, but actually the movement was like that because it was like 20,000 people looking for a cause. You know, each one had their reason to be angry. More or less, generally, it was about inequality. You know,
but this is generally the way the left is. They sense inequality. They sense tax abuse. But they have not a unified approach to combat the monopolies that are arrayed against them. And it's interesting because you're seeing this all over the world now, whether it's in Spain with Indignados that kicked off this whole global insurrection against bankers, the banker occupation. And we saw Occupy Wall Street, and now we're seeing the Gilets jaunes. Do you see all of these movements connected in some way? Yeah,
I mean, they're connected because they come at a historical moment where basically the Thatcher-Reagan cycle comes to a moment of truth, that it has, given birth to societies that are super polarized.
Right, so neoliberalism has run its course.
It's like a truth moment for
trickle-down economics did not trickle down.
It didn't work. It doesn't work. So and like everybody is opening their eyes about that, and that's worldwide. And so this option, basically, I don't know if it's that conscious in the people's head, because they are so angry that they just, it's. Sometimes I was in this demonstration and I felt like the 14th of July, 1789 must have been like this, because there's a mix of politics, vulgarity, anger, something that is not controllable, and it could go either way. It could go.
You're referring to the French Revolution there.
What?
The French Revolution.
Yes.
Usually there's something that kicks it off. So the French Revolution, I believe the price of bread was reaching a level where people were starving. Here the taxes, as you point out, on gas, on petrol, was at a point where people had to begin to sacrifice, either eat or get gas.
Exactly, because the movement didn't come from Paris. The movement came from outside Paris. And as you may know, now outside Paris, there are fewer and fewer jobs. And for people to work, they have to use their cars. And they usually have battered old cars and that consume a lot of gasoline because they cannot change their cars. Right,
this is something that actually Stacy pointed out to me when she was looking at the Gilets jaunes movement, that it did kind of get traction outside where people are more dependent on their cars. There's no mass transit, for example. And so the life in France, which is, it's a welfare state, it's a mixed, right? A mixed economy,
for now.
The margin is very tight. So the state provides a certain welfare, a certain income, which covers needs, coffee, some bread, some gas. But it's very tight. And any slight deviation from this, like even a small raise in tax on gas, and suddenly that lifestyle is shattered in a way. What was the government's response? Because typically in France, the government always caves. They always give in, and they always end up printing more money. In this case, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Macron did capitulate earlier this year. He introduced a $25 billion stimulus, and so they got what they wanted. They got some more money.
Yeah, some more money, but it was like sprinkling some aid money on a third world country. I mean, structurally, the problems will keep going on, because it's not because you offer a prima, I don't know how to say that in English, but like a bonus, exactly, a bonus of 100 euros, that you're going to change the life of people who are stuck in faraway towns where there are no jobs. I remember talking with a lady when I was in demonstration, She was from eastern France, like really the far back, which is the border of Germany, and she looked so tired and so genuinely sad and tired. It was really moving. And she said, there are no jobs anymore. We work like 2 hours here, 2 hours there. Thank God there's Germany. I take my car, I go to Germany every day to make some cleaning time. I said, before I used to work in a factory. We're talking Eastern France is the area that has been the most struck by deindustrialization. I mean, the fact that outsourcing, the factories would be closing and the work would be outsourced somewhere, Romania, China, etc. So it's also this moment that has been sanctioned by the Gilets jaunes.
All right, so structurally, economically, that's a whole topic to get into, but I did want to touch on something else here, which I thought was remarkable, that in this particular instance, and we're seeing this also in Hong Kong, police seem to be targeting people's eyes with what they call the eye snipers. And they are, and this was covered recently by Robert Chalmers in a piece for GQ. And it's quite disturbing. The sublethal LBDs by police. You were on the front lines. You're covering this. You have eyewitness to what's happening. Is this what is truthfully happening? What's happening? Can you kind of fill that in?
It's very shocking. I mean, I'm now 50-something, and I've been doing a lot of demonstrations in this country, and I've never seen, even at the end of the 70s, where it was quite violent, I've never seen such a level of violence, of police violence against demonstrators. They use those LBD, flashball, whatever you call them, non-lethal weapons. It's quite scary because basically you hear pop. It's this very short sound, not very impressive sound, and then you see someone falling. And most of the time, from what we have witnessed with Pedro da Fonseca, we have filmed that and put some of our material on YouTube. They never shoot because they threaten. They shoot like to have people running away, most of the time, and that's like that in any war, most of the time the real fighters know how to protect themselves. They know how to, and usually when they shoot, we saw and filmed like grandmothers being shot. One of the examples we were able to film and document was a lady she was 75, she was the wife, and he was there of an ex-gendarme, which is a military police. The guy had done all his career in the police, and there were really people coming from outside of Paris, very dressed properly, absolutely no threat to the police, and then they were shot like if they represented a threat. Those weapons are not used in the way they should be used, and I question the fact that they are being used, because the level of injury, mutilation that they inflict to people it has never been seen in the history.
Right. So what is being alleged is that these flash grenades, projectiles, are being targeted at people's eyes with laser scopes.
Not all the time, but yes, it has happened.
It happens.
Yeah, sure.
And the maiming that goes on and the loss of eyes is extraordinary in this instance. So this level of...
It breaks your skull.
It breaks the skull. Yeah. The skull has to be replaced, titanium plates, etc. So this level of police brutality is also, I would say, something new in France. It's the militarization of the police. We see that everywhere in the UK, in America, around the world, the militarization of the police. And, that in itself seems to be a justifiable reason for an insurrection.
Yeah.
Would you agree? I mean, if you have a police, in America, the idea is the military is never allowed on American soil to fight American citizens. There's a law against that, and that's been usurped.
Yeah.
And it's a violation of the social contract when you have your armed forces attack your population.
But I remember many instances where the American forces have shot at citizens.
And that it's becoming an increasing global problem. There's the social contract that you talked about, the French Revolution, and the introduction of a social contract. When it's broken, according to John Locke, one of the architects of the Enlightenment, there should be an insurrection. So, I mean, has this insurrection got legs, or are we just going to go back to business as usual?
That is difficult to predict. I think something has changed forever in the minds of the French. In May 1968, which is the historical great insurgency, that there was only one people dead. There was never someone maimed or lost their eye or something like that. And the police forces back then made great pride at trying to retain the violence of the police. And I must say that they did impeccable work.
Okay, we'll have to stop it there.
Yeah.
But yeah, the 68 reference is a good one to make. Paul, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
You're welcome.
That's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report. With me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Paul Moreira, journalist, independent journalist. Look him up, find his work. He's excellent. If you want to catch us on Twitter, it's Keiser Report or KeiserReport.com. Until next time, bye, y'all.